The Alps echoed with forgotten names and long-lost ambitions, but none would reshape history quite like the Habsburgs. They began as regional counts in Switzerland, mere pages in Europe's feudal story. Yet, within a few centuries, they stood as emperors, rulers of half the known world. Their rise wasn't born on the battlefield, but in courtrooms, marriage halls, and whispered diplomacy. Rudolf I's election as King of the Romans in 1273 signaled the first seismic shift. He wasn't the most powerful or noble candidate, but he was cunning. With swift moves, he defeated Ottokar II of Bohemia and claimed Austria, a prize that would become the heart of Habsburg ambitions. The dynasty had found its crown and a home worth defending for generations. From then on, power was no longer simply conquered, it was inherited. The Habsburgs mastered the art of dynastic marriage, crafting alliances with the precision of generals and the vision of empire builders. They didn't need to win every war, they just needed to marry the victors. Lands, titles, and even kingdoms were absorbed through unions signed in ink rather than sealed in blood. By the 15th century, their strategy was clear. Let others fight while Austria married. The phrase belligerant alii to Felix, Austria nubi. Let others wage war, but you, happy Austria, marry, became a motto, a mission, a prophecy. Through carefully selected unions, they gained control over Hungary, Bohemia, and eventually Spain, with its sprawling global empire. No Habsburg embodied the family's legacy of power, quite like Charles V, crowned Holy Roman Emperor in 1519. He ruled territories stretching from Vienna to Peru. The sun never set on his empire, not in Europe, nor in the Americas, but the glory of his reign came with an impossible burden. Too many cultures, too many enemies, and a crumbling idea of religious unity. Charles faced fire on all sides. Protestant reformers tore the Holy Roman Empire apart. France stood ready to strike. The Ottomans advanced from the east, and the New World, filled with silver and rebellion, demanded attention. Charles V was both a universal monarch and a man desperately trying to hold it all together. Eventually, even he admitted defeat and retired to a monastery, but the Habsburg project continued. His brother Ferdinand took Austria and the imperial crown. His son Philip inherited Spain and the New World. The dynasty split into Austrian and Spanish, but their bloodline remained one. Their shared mission: uphold Catholicism, crush Protestantism, and preserve the old order, no matter the cost. Religion, more than ambition, would define the next chapter of Habsburg rule. The Reformation ignited ideological war. Princes rebelled, cities burned, and Europe fractured. For the Habsburgs, these were not just theological disputes, they were threats to empire. Their legitimacy, rooted in divine favor, was shaken with every church that turned away from Rome. The result was the 30 Years' War, Europe's deadliest conflict before the 20th century. It began as a Protestant uprising in Bohemia, but soon engulfed the continent. Austria stood as a Catholic bulwark, facing off against Protestant forces from Sweden, the Dutch Republic, and even Catholic France, which feared Habsburg dominance more than heresy. The war devastated the Holy Roman Empire. Millions perished, cities were reduced to ash, and yet the Habsburgs endured. The Peace of Westphalia in 1648 ended the dream of a unified Catholic Europe, but it did not end Habsburg ambition. Austria remained powerful. In fact, it emerged more centralized, more modern, and more determined, while the Spanish Habsburg line declined into inbreeding and stagnation. Austria adapted. Maria Theresa's reign in the 18th century proved that strength could return through reform. She modernized the army, revamped taxation, and laid the groundwork for a more efficient bureaucracy. She wasn't just a queen, she was a stateswoman among kings. Her son, Joseph II, tried to complete the transformation. He believed in enlightenment, ideals, religious tolerance, education, legal equality. But reform moved faster than tradition could bear. His decrees met resistance from nobles, clergy, and the very people they were meant to uplift. He died with many of his reforms undone, but his legacy intact. Throughout the 18th and early 19th centuries, Austria fought to maintain its influence amid the rise of rival powers. The Ottoman threat waned, but a new danger emerged. Napoleon Bonaparte, the Habsburgs clashed with him in battle after battle, their empire reshaped and humiliated. In 1806, the Holy Roman Empire, founded by Charlemagne and ruled by Habsburgs for centuries, was formally dissolved. Francis II would rebrand as Emperor of Austria. The dream of universal monarchy was dead, but a modern imperial identity took its place. No longer rulers of a holy realm, the Habsburgs became administrators of a patchwork of peoples: Germans, Hungarians, Czechs, Italians, Croats, and Moral under one imperial roof. This diversity was both the Habsburg Empire's strength and its curse. The 19th century saw the rise of nationalism. Subjects who once accepted distant emperors now demanded self-rule. Hungary rebelled. Italians sought unification. Slavic peoples voiced discontent. The glue holding the empire together began to dissolve. Even as the monarchy tried to evolve, time was slipping away. The Austro-Hungarian Compromise of 1867 created a dual monarchy, a desperate concession to Hungarian nationalism. For a time, it worked. Vienna glittered as a cultural capital. Science, music, and art flourished. But beneath the grandeur, unrest grew. Then came Sarajevo. On June 28, 1914, Archduke Franz Ferdinand, the heir to the Habsburg throne, was assassinated. The bullet fired by Gavrilo Princip didn't just end a life. It shattered the fragile balance of Europe. Austria-Hungary declared war on Serbia. Alliances activated. The First World War began. The Habsburgs fought to survive, but their empire was stretched too thin, economically drained, militarily fractured, and politically obsolete. The once proud dynasty could not endure the weight of modern warfare. In 1918, as the war ended, the empire collapsed. Nationalist movements tore it apart. Emperor Karl I abdicated and went into exile. 8 centuries of rule ended in silence. No grand battle, no final triumph, just the steady unraveling of one of history's longest dynasties. Their palaces still rise. Their bloodline, though stripped of thrones, remains. Their legacy is complicated. They were defenders of Catholic orthodoxy and suppressors of reform. They championed cultural magnificence, but often crushed political liberty. They kept Europe stable, but also resisted its progress. The Habsburgs were not heroes or villains. They were rulers, flawed, brilliant, calculating, human. Today, we look back at their rise not as nostalgia, but as a mirror. Their story reminds us how fragile empires can be, how power can be inherited, but not always controlled, and how even the greatest dynasties fall not always from conquest, but from the weight of their own contradictions. The Habsburgs didn't just build an empire, they built an age. And though that age has passed, Its echoes remain etched in the history of Europe and in the memory of the world. While Austria held the imperial scepter, Spain held the oceans. The Spanish branch of the Habsburgs, launched by Charles V's son, Philip II, built the most expansive maritime empire the world had ever seen. From silver mines in Peru to galleons in Manila, Spain became the heart of a global trade network powered by Habsburg ambition. Philip II ruled with the cold precision of a bureaucrat and the zealous fire of a Catholic crusader. Under his watch, Spain defeated the Ottomans at Lepanto and attempted to crush Protestant England with the ill-fated Armada. Yet even as wealth poured in, the Spanish economy weakened. Inflation soared, wars multiplied, and the dynasty grew rigid and inbred. As the 17th century progressed, Spain's enemies adapted. Britain and the Dutch cut into its trade routes. France challenged it in Europe, and within, poor leadership crippled resilience. By the time Charles II, physically and mentally incapacitated, took the throne, the Spanish Habsburgs were a shell of their former power. His death without an heir would plunge Europe into chaos. Charles II's death triggered a succession crisis that would embroil Europe for over a decade. France claimed the throne through the Bourbon line, while Austria sought to keep Spain in the Habsburg fold. The War of the Spanish Succession was more than dynastic squabbling. It was a fight for the balance of power across the continent. The Austrians, British, and Dutch allied to stop a unified Bourbon Empire stretching from Paris to Madrid. Battles raged from Italy to the Low Countries. Though Austria achieved several military victories, the toll was immense. In the end, the Treaty of Utrecht acknowledged Philip V as King of Spain, but severed Spanish ties with Austria permanently. Austria gained territories in Italy and the Netherlands, but the dream of a united Habsburg superempire was over. From now on, Vienna would focus inwardon, managing its patchwork lands and preparing for the storms of modernity. The family had avoided total loss, but it was clear power alone could no longer hold the empire together. The 18th century brought not just revolution in science and thought, but also in governance. The Habsburgs had a choice: modernize or perish. Maria Theresa, who came to power in 1740, was determined to preserve the monarchy through reform. She strengthened the army, centralized administration, and modernized taxation. Her reign marked a delicate balancing act, in vision but autocratic in style. She laid the foundations of the modern Austrian state, while remaining deeply rooted in Catholic orthodoxy. Her son, Joseph II, pushed the reforms, further abolishing serfdom, curbing church power, and promoting religious tolerance, but change too quickly imposed breeds resistance. Joseph's reforms sparked unrest among nobles, clergy, and national groups. His dream of a rational, efficient empire collapsed under the weight of tradition and complexity. Still, his ideas planted seeds that would bear fruit in future revolutions. The Habsburgs were now guardians of a fragile legacy caught between old empires and new ideologies. The French Revolution and Napoleon's rise shattered the monarchic order that the Habsburgs held dear. Austria found itself at war with revolutionary France, in a struggle not just for territory, but for the survival of dynastic Europe. Battles were lost, territories ceded, and the ancient Holy Roman Empire was finally dissolved in 1806. In its place, Francis II declared the Austrian Empire a desperate move to preserve prestige. Napoleon humiliated Austria, repeatedly defeating it at Austerlitz and marrying Marie-Louise, the Habsburg emperor's daughter. For a moment, the balance of power shifted entirely. Yet Napoleon's ambition would be his downfall, and the Habsburgs waited patiently to reclaim influence. After Waterloo, Austria emerged as a dominant power at the Congress of Vienna in 1815. Led by the brilliant diplomat Prince Metternich, it became the architect of the post-Napoleonic order. The monarchy once again stood as a bulwark against revolution, nationalism, and liberalism. But the world had changed. Time would not wait. The 19th century brought with it powerful new forces, nationalism, industrialization. For the Habsburgs, rulers of a multi-ethnic empire, these forces were explosive. Italians sought unification. Hungarians demanded autonomy. Slavs whispered rebellion. The empire's diversity became its greatest vulnerability. Revolutions in 1848 swept across Europe, and Austria was not spared. Crowds took to the streets in Vienna. In Hungary, nationalist armies rose. The aging Emperor Ferdinand abdicated, and his 18-year-old nephew, Franz Joseph, took the throne, a man who would rule for nearly 7 decades. Franz Joseph was disciplined, traditional, and unbending. He crushed the revolts and reasserted imperial control. Yet the old methods could not quiet the new realities. In 1867, he signed the Ausgleich, creating the Austro-Hungarian Empire, a dual monarchy, granting Hungary its own parliament and autonomy while maintaining shared foreign and military policy. The dual monarchy stabilized the empire, but it also formalized division. Hungarians gained equality, but other ethnic groups, Czechs, Slovaks, Croats, Serbs, and Romanians remained underrepresented. Vienna glittered in this age. Composers like Mahler and Brahms rose. Psychoanalysis was born and buzzed with ideas. But beneath the culture was a deepening political crisis. The Industrial Revolution transformed cities, but also sharpened social inequalities. Nationalist newspapers, radical student groups, and secret societies plotted change. Meanwhile, Franz Joseph aged into a symbol of continuity, admirable, but increasingly disconnected from modern realities. By the turn of the 20th century, the empire resembled a magnificent mosaic, dazzling from afar, but brittle at the seams. And at its center, the Habsburgs continued to rule, seemingly eternal. Few imagined that a single bullet would end it all. In 1914, Archduke Franz Ferdinand, heir to the Austro-Hungarian throne, traveled to Sarajevo city, bubbling with tension and ethnic resentment. On June 28th, he was assassinated by Gavrilo Princip, a Bosnian Serb nationalist. The event triggered a chain reaction. Austria-Hungary declared war on Serbia. Russia mobilized. Germany invaded Belgium. France and Britain entered the fray. What could have been a regional crisis exploded into World War I, pulling the entire continent into a maelstrom of trench warfare and mass destruction. The empire was unprepared. Its army was large but outdated, its people divided in loyalty. As the war dragged on, shortages mounted, morale crumbled, and calls for independence grew louder. The ancient dynasty, worn down by centuries of compromise and pride, began to unravel under the modern horror of total war. By late 1918, defeat was inevitable. Germany was collapsing. The Austro-Hungarian military could no longer hold the front. Revolutions erupted in Budapest and Vienna. National councils declared independence in Czechoslovakia, Yugoslavia, and Poland. On November 11, 1918, Emperor Karl I relinquished power, not with a formal abdication, but a humble withdrawal. He hoped the monarchy could survive in some form, but the people were done. The Republic of Austria was declared. The empire vanished. It ended not with an execution, nor a fiery revolution, but with quiet resignation. The last emperor died in exile, and the Habsburg name, once feared, once worshipped, was reduced to memory. Today, the Habsburg palaces still stand. The Schönbrunn, the Hofburg, and Prague Castle are monuments to a vanished world. They remind us of a family that ruled not through brute force alone, but through time, patience, and vision. Their story is a testament to the long arc of history, to how empires rise not in a moment, but over centuries. The Habsburgs were flawed, ambitious, often ruthless, yet undeniably enduring. They were the architects of an era and the custodians of a vision of Europe that was complex, multi-ethnic, and precariously balanced. In the postmodern world, their empire is studied not as a relic of glory, but as a warning. How long can diversity be sustained by force? Can stability coexist with repression? Can peace last when justice is uneven? 8 centuries, dozens of crowns, thousands of battles. The Habsburgs survived crusades, plagues, reformations, revolutions, and wars. Few families have ever held so much power for so long, and fewer still fell with such quiet grace. Their rise is a lesson in political genius. Their fall is a lesson in inevitability. In remembering the Habsburgs, we don't just remember emperors and battles. We remember how fragile greatness can be, how the choices of one family shaped continents, and how even the mightiest house rising from the Alps must one day return to the dust.